Okay, so it's just gone 3 o'clock. I'm John Coster at the Documentary Media Centre, and I'm here with my colleague, the researcher in residence here at the Documentary Media Centre, Dr. Paul Riley. Here we go, our second conversation. Really looking forward to this one. Talking to PhD researcher Jenny Hayes. Hello, how are you?
Hi there, I'm good, thanks.
Good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation with us today. We wanted to start off with a nice, easy question.
Okay.
And that was, why are you interested in this subject, or why did you become interested in this subject?
Sure. So I think really what my interest came from is I was seeing on social media this sort of footage of policemen and soldiers and things like that, and police brutality, and it was attracting a lot of attention. So for my master's research, I did look at a much smaller scale activism in Northern Ireland and how they use social media to publicize their cause. And what I was seeing is it was the posts about police brutality of the protesters and how people thought that the police were very heavy-handed with them. And it was this that was gaining the most attention on social media. It wasn't the cause itself or the issues that were trying to be discussed. They were environmental issues. It was really about this policing that was really catching people's attention. And I was really seeing sort of the power of using social media to record and to share this stuff that was going on in places around the world, and how this could really give us a bit of power against sort of the state, against the police, and sort of reshape that power imbalance in a way, just using a mobile phone and social media. And this is things that we all have. And I think if you look at it in the context of Palestine, Israel, it's very, very interesting. You've got such a huge conflict. It's a huge, long-running, controversial conflict. And it's a very asymmetric conflict between, you've got the Israeli state with all the military and the surveillance and all of that structures in place against the Palestinians. And really what they're able to do is they're able to resist this just using mobile phones, using social media, getting these images out to the world. And I think that's really quite powerful. And I think it is a way that ordinary people can share their experiences and be witnesses to what they are experiencing, and be able to share that with people who might otherwise have no idea what was going on. And really, I think that's such a powerful thing to be able to have. So my research is then looking at how these images, mostly photographs and videos, how these spread on social media, how organizations share them, and how the public respond to them on social media. That's the main point of my research.
And just asking that, Jenny, I mean, thinking about what drew you towards the Israel-Palestine conflict as a case study in this, so can you say a bit more about what was your reason for picking that as the case study to explore surveillance?
I think just because it's such a long running and it's such an everyday occupation, it's that these soldiers are in everyday Palestinians' lives. If you see in the images that they're walking down the streets, they're just everywhere with machine guns and all of this checkpoints and surveillance and all of these structures that are in place. And it's such an everyday occurrence, and it's so normalized in that context. So it's sort of looking at how they can resist this sort of normalized surveillance and occupation, and how it's possible for ordinary people to try and resist against such a powerful enemy in a way. It's a way of pushing back against that when there may not be any other avenues available to the Palestinians of resistance.
So if we were to put ourselves in the mind frame now of someone that you found on social media that is using their smartphone in order to, capture what's going on in their daily life when it comes to this kind of normalized occupation, do you feel, have you come across anybody that is using their experience in a way that they've seen anywhere else in any other kind of protest movement? Do you think they see it as being totally unique in the situation they're in? Is there any kind of shared knowledge? Are they drawing on other protests or other people that are capturing things?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think because the social media is obviously so international, they're able to make the links between protests around the world and social movements going on all around. And I think one of the key things that really I'm pulling out from my research is the links between the Black Lives Matter movement in America and how they're really drawing on the tools that have been used there in terms of the recording and how to do it in a very professional way and to make sure that the narrative is told, and how they're able to actually spread that on social media you're actually seeing a lot of solidarity between the Palestinians and Black Lives Matter protesters and activists in the US. And there is communication going on between them and sharing knowledge and sharing ideas on how to resist against a completely different enemy. But it's that feeling of solidarity and that feeling of we're resisting against something, and we're feeling we're in this together. It's really looking at how they are sharing knowledge and being able to share tactics and learn from each other and learn how is best to put this stuff out on social media and how to get the best response. And I do think that is happening, and I think that is because we're able to open up and we're able to communicate with people all around the world in these different situations, even if it's a very different context. I think there are a lot of similarities going on there, definitely.
Yeah, I was watching something a few weeks ago about Syria, and it was about people, ordinary people that have gone out and almost like taught themselves and scientists in order to collect evidence of a bombing or a war crime or those kind of situations where there's no media there to cover it. They've trained themselves and got quite good at collecting the evidence in order to be able to provide it in a forensic way for someone later on to say, well, yes, that was a phosphorus bomb or whatever. Do you think that people are recording it now not because they're expecting any immediate change? It's more about now making sure that they're collecting the evidence of what's happening in such a way that it can be seen that, well, actually, this is a systematic approach, or it's systemic, maybe, you know what I mean, in the way that they are triggering people or attacking people or immediately at protest what their tactics are.
Absolutely. I think some of it is to do with sort of having that record and perhaps even using it as an archive on social media of these images and these videos. And it's just this evidence that this is happening and this has happened. And perhaps we sometimes feel like we can't actually make a difference and we're not actually going to create any change by recording this one incident. But I think it's contributing to this sort of body of knowledge and this sort of body that's built up by ordinary people and also by the media and by different organizations that are collecting this information. And it's bringing it all together, and it's able to say, well, this is happening and we're witnessing this, and this is what we're experiencing. And even though maybe we can't necessarily bring about change because this is quite a tough issue and this is very difficult, it's not going to go away, I think just being able to be there and just witnessing it and sharing it and just feeling seen by the rest of the world, being able to see that their voices are being heard and able to feel like somebody is listening, even though it feels like perhaps the international community isn't really stepping up and taking any action on what's happening. I do think there is some sort of sense of that going on.
I think that's a really interesting point about feeling seen, about almost this is an archive. Maybe it's a sort of rolling real-time archive. Obviously very relevant to what John's doing here in the centre. I just wanted to pick up on something you said earlier on about the packaging. So, are you finding lots of evidence of very professional-looking footage, dare I say it, or is it people with smartphones who obviously are in a hurry just sort of putting out a phone and taking a picture, so it's not shot in a way which the viewer can see clearly, or is it a bit of both? I mean, are you finding examples of more professionalized, quite amateur, sort of almost reactive, or is it a bit of both? There's no patterns.
So in this context, we're definitely seeing both. I think that makes it slightly different to somewhere like Syria where there is no media. But in Palestine, you are getting journalists getting in there and people are recording this in a very professional way. I mean, you look at images and there's loads of people and they've got big cameras and big video recorders and they are recording it. But you've also got the people with their smartphones, and that's obviously shakier footage, not as well captured. And then what you're seeing on social media is you tend to see both getting joined together in a way, and it's sort of bringing it together, and you'll see sort of video collages where very professional looking photographs and professional video clips are then put together with this shaky handheld mobile camera footage. And I feel like it's sort of it's trying to bring it all together, and it's trying to use both the professional sort of journalistic practices and also sort of that raw footage that ordinary people have captured, which gives it that sort of authenticity, and it feels less staged, I think, definitely, than the much more professional pictures that we're used to seeing. So I definitely think in this context there's both. You're getting both the professional journalists going in and taking the images, and then you're also getting this very authentic, very real footage coming out just from people's mobile phones. Definitely both of them in this situation.
It's just interesting to think about that. That's a really interesting case study that, I mean, citizens are better at recording things than they were 10 years ago, because we all use smartphones and we're all used to taking images of our, family and friends. So it's almost like that blur between professional and sort of amateur isn't really as distinct as it was. Are you finding that in your research very much that maybe there isn't really a clear distinction often between what is a seasoned observer and what is just a member of the public who saw something?
Absolutely, yeah. I think, I mean, a lot of my trouble has come from trying to work out whether something has been taken by someone on their mobile phone or actually someone with a professional camera and a professional journalist, because your mobile phone photos are becoming so professional now and they look so good. A lot of the time it's quite hard to tell where something's come from. And a lot of the time this stuff isn't sourced. It doesn't say who's actually taken the photo. So there is definitely this sort of blurring of the line between the professional journalist and the ordinary person with their phone. And I think that's really something that's coming out from this, definitely.
Yeah. I think also one of the key things is that I did last night in preparation for this event. I did a search on the hashtag Palestine just to see what came up. Hashtag Belarus as well, just to see what comes up. You know what I mean? There's in people's minds. And what was really interesting is a lot of the footage in the first kind of couple of tweets, if you like, was. Now it was no longer whether it was professional or not, because like you said, whether it was a camera or a smartphone, that side of it had gone. Maybe using it in our own lives meant that we were competent now at using it. So then it was no longer skills. It was about making sure that you identified and honed in on what needed to be recorded or should be recorded in order for it to get any traction. Or the top one was a soldier with his knee in an old guy's neck. So of course, suddenly it was irrelevant that it was an IDF soldier or it was an old Palestinian guy. It was the knee on the neck that brought the sharing, maybe with your Black Lives Matter's reference earlier, that would get people to. So maybe it's interesting that it's the actions that people take, as opposed to the fact that they're there, which will become the issue that gets kind of traction and stuff. I mean, are you seeing this now when you're saying in the footage? Once you've decided whether it's mobile phone or a DSLR, that there's a lot more thought going into making sure the narrative is captured rather than just capturing footage.
Yeah, definitely. I think people are becoming aware that they need to make a good story. It needs to be very visible to be able to be seen on social media. And I think that there is some sort of attempts being made to try and make it show the narrative that wants to be shown and make it as sort of emotional and attention grabbing as possible. When you see images and they look almost staged in a way, because you've got the old lady crying at her house being demolished, and it looks almost like you've taken that, because that will make people emotional looking at this old woman who's lost her house. But then it also looks very authentic because it's been taken on a mobile phone. It's somebody who's captured perhaps their grandmother, and it is a very authentic moment. But then there is also that element of sort of playing a part, or sort of being aware that all these images are being shown to the world. I think because people are so interested in this conflict, particularly, that people know that this footage or these images will get shared and will get looked at. And there is that sense of trying to portray it in a certain way and to gain sympathy and the solidarity for the cause. And I do think that there is that sort of that awareness of trying to make the images as visible as possible and get the most attention as possible. And sometimes that's successful, and sometimes, I mean, I'm seeing a lot where there's just no attention at all. There's no engagement by social media users, even if it's a very...
Yeah, what John was asking, also what you said there, Jenny, too. How important is the caption or the description? Because I kind of wondered about that, because you were saying about some that get no traction at all. I mean, presumably in the caption or how they describe, like it's a YouTube video, they'll say, brutality, whatever. I mean, how important do you think that is in terms of the stuff that you see that gets a lot of traction, the stuff that gets very little? That's important.
I think it is important, and what you can actually see, because I'm looking at different organizations across different platforms, you're actually seeing some of the same images coming up a few times and sort of packaged in a different way according to the organization. And actually you can see, if you're accompanied by the story and the sort of all those details that go along with what's actually happened, you do tend to get more attention than just posting the image, even if it's a very emotional image or it's very violent or it's something like that. If you have that sort of context and those details written down with it, that seems to make the difference. That's sort of just an anecdote or what I've seen, but yes, it does definitely seem to make a difference how the videos, how the images are packaged and how they're captioned by the people who are posting them online. And that does seem to be quite important in terms of getting the attention and getting that engagement from the social media users. Definitely.
So it's almost like the story.
Yeah.
So going back to the stuff John was saying, it's almost like the story is strong, the narrative, and go back to what you said, the emotional hook. You know, so again, it's almost like news media framing. Except this, and in your case of your research, is organisations trying to obviously draw attention or citizens. I mean, I think that's really interesting. So it's like the text always has a really important framing power in that.
The context, and we. Yeah, my next question. Here we go. My next one. Yeah, a lot of people won't know this, but as a researcher, you're also a human being. Okay, and you're allowed to have other time. But you're not just researching your PhD. Don't tell Paul. And you're talking to ordinary people that will probably know that you're an academic and a researcher, but have no idea about what you're talking about. This is very similar to a conversation I had with someone yesterday in preparation for this, because I spoke to them about, Palestine and Palestinians and Israelis and occupation, Gaza, and Donald Trump, the new embassy in Jerusalem and stuff. And I kind of got the impression from them, and this is what I want to just test out on yourself, is the fact that it was this Palestinians are these kind of people and they cause a lot of trouble, and the Israelis are defending themselves. And of course, the Israelis spend a lot of money defending that position and putting that position out there and stuff. And they kind of fell into that mindset of, it's, every time you saw something where someone was protesting and you go, well, yeah, they are being aggressive, as opposed to what they were being aggressive about. And so therefore it was, the IDF defending itself because they were being attacked, with no context as to why people were angry and felt that the only route to protest was by being angry. And so I suppose we've got this really heavily controlled narrative at the top. But when it comes down to your average person, maybe that's why there's no engagement with some of those tweets, is because it's just the normalization is, I've already decided what that image means to me, and they're either protagonist or the aggrieved, Do you find when you talk to your friends or anybody else, if you have a conversation in a coffee shop with someone now about your research, do you think most people already have an entrenched position that's almost like immovable based on the fact that they've already got this historical view of the don't really think about it in modern terms?
Yeah, definitely. I think there is sort of overly simplified a lot of the time, and it does sort of fall into this very simple narrative of Israel defending themselves, Palestinians being very violent and aggressive. And actually you're seeing that on social media as well. You're definitely seeing this sort of very simplified narrative playing out. You've got people just sort of angrily shouting there, Israel is terrible or Palestine is terrible. And it's rather than actually engaging with the sort of nuanced points that are actually being tried to be made. And actually what I sort of looked at in the comments was sort of whether or not people were engaging with the issues that were discussed in the posts or the images themselves, or whether people were just sort of making a general comment about hating Israel or hating Palestine or something very general. And actually what you're seeing is the majority of comments are sort of people just expressing their sort of their opinion one way or the other, rather than actually engaging with some of the points that are being made. And it does seem to be that there is no discussion about the sort of the actual what's going on there, the occupation, the sort of historical background, all of these really complicated things. And there isn't really much of that going on. So there doesn't seem to be any discussions, any sort of in-depth discussions of what's happening, or it's all just people have their set point of view and they're just sort of, they see an image and they're just agreeing that, yes, it shows Israel is terrible, or it shows that Palestinians are violent, and it just confirms that narrative. And you're definitely seeing that playing out on the social media comment section in these images. I do think that is one of the problems. You're not seeing proper discussions, even though many times the surveillance images themselves are trying to be portrayed in the context, and the information is put around them. So in the caption, there will be oftentimes quite a lot of information and trying to share some of this context. But then social media users just see it, and the comment section isn't really any discussion. It's just people's opinion one way or the other. It doesn't seem to be any kind of discussion about the context, really.
Who's following on from that, I was going to say, do you think that social media platforms in general are places where people change their mind if they see something with even evidence which maybe is hard to refute? You think social media platforms have that potential to change people's minds? Think about surveillance specifically.
I think that there is that potential. I do think that seeing these images should hopefully change something if people are willing to look at the images and engage with the discussions that are going on social media. I think it does open up sort of the issue of Palestine and Israel in a different way to what we may have seen in the past. So before, when you were just seeing what was portrayed in the mainstream media, you would sort of just take that. But now we are seeing all these different voices, and one of the key things of Palestinian use of social media is sort of getting out their narrative, getting out their perspective that tended to be ignored in the past, in the mainstream media specifically. And really what they're using it for is to share sort of everyday Palestinian stuff and stories and how they live and historical things about their lives. And you're actually getting that sort of context coming out. And I think that is that opportunity for people around the world to see this is how Palestinians are living and this is their lives and these are real people. And it kind of humanizes them in a way that perhaps you weren't really getting. You were just getting the sort of the conflict and the violence. And also a lot of this is coming out, showing their everyday lives and showing that they're real people and living normal lives, going about their lives. And even in the surveillance images where you're seeing soldiers in the street, you're also seeing Palestinians going to school. You're seeing children going to school, or you're seeing them in the marketplace. And I think that is sort of one of the benefits of being on social media and seeing these images. And hopefully it would sort of humanize Palestinians and make people aware of what's going on and potentially change your mind about what they think.
I was going to say, I think go back to your point about archive. I wonder whether it's again archiving experiences which aren't captured by mainstream media, inverted commas, or legacy media. Maybe that is one of the sort of symbolic acts of surveillance, is that there is something out there that says this happened, even if it didn't get reported widely. There is evidence that claim is there. So again, maybe it's about visibility of that claim of what happened, which isn't there. It's really important.
Yeah. And from my point of view, here, just looking at, the broad stroke of incidents that are going on, or, protests around the world now compared to, say, in the last, since World War II, really the only way to sort this situation is through, dialogue, and there needs to be coexistence. Now, whether that's a two-nation state, whatever, we're not going to get into that here and such, but I'm thinking a bit from the point of view that probably out of a lot of the conflict, terrorist or protest movements we've got at the moment, that maybe some of them are backed up with so-called extremism and terrorist stories as well, that really this is an opportunity for solidarity and unity in how social media is used around the Palestinian issue. Because really, if you made it about education, access to healthcare, all these kind of, the impact of COVID, for example, in the fact that, you suddenly realise the little infrastructure that they've got is not good enough to deal with that. The only way we're really going to get both parties round the table to have a conversation about peaceful coexistence is probably from an economic point of view or a humanitarian point of view. It's never going to be about military use or terrorism and things like that. They're the things that are played out in the mainstream media in order to stop thinking about the fact that these people are human beings. And the one thing that we did do many years ago, in 2014, when we had a documentary media centre here in Pop-Up, is we invited some people from One Voice Europe, and they brought a Palestinian and an Israeli, and there they were coexisting in the same room with about 20 of us on a Friday night, having a conversation about young people on both sides want conflict to end, you know what I mean, because they want to kind of get on with their lives and stuff like that. Are you seeing on social media, when you're looking at all of these platforms, a willingness to unite and work in solidarity, or is it always about someone being more right than someone else?
To be honest, if you're looking at it, there doesn't seem to be that willingness. That it does seem to be people are very much divided into one side or the other, and there's not really that sort of willingness to work on solutions or to work on moving forward. It's just sort of about shouting how you feel about one side and saying, well, this is bad, or there's not really any sort of dialogue going on between people who have different opinions and people who want to try and have a constructive conversation. And you're not really seeing that on these posts, which is, I think, a missed opportunity perhaps, that to get these people talking. It does seem to be very general comments, angry comments, very emotional comments, rather than anything very constructive. And that is what I'm seeing mostly on across these different platforms. I think it is interesting, though, if you compare the platforms, because I've looked at Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and you actually do see differences in the way that people respond. So on Instagram and Facebook, you do tend to get these very general comments that are pretty much pro-Palestinian and just saying everything is terrible. Then when you go to Twitter, you're seeing a lot more discussion going on, a lot more comments that are engaging with the content, and there is a bit more of a discussion. There's more of a thread of discussion going on Twitter as opposed to the other two platforms, which is quite an interesting finding that I found.
My final question, then Paul can have the last question, so he can think about it. Is what's the impact on you as an individual? You know, I mean, as a non-academic, you know, I mean, you're a researcher. You've immersed yourself in this. I mean, I know the rabbit hole that I go down upstairs in the archive when I'm looking at stuff because I'm fascinated. As a person, are you looking at that? Has it affected how you look at other conflicts around the world? Does it make you look at Extinction Rebellion in the UK, Black Lives Matter? Does it make you look at the Uyghurs in China, or, you know, the Rohingya in Bangladesh? I mean, do you kind of pay different kinds of attention to that based on the fact that you're doing a research around this kind of subject?
I think so. Just because I've got so immersed in all of these images and all of this footage, and it's taken up a lot of time just going through and looking at all this sort of information that's out there. And it is quite demoralizing in a way to go through and just sift through photo after photo, and it's police brutality and it's people getting killed, perhaps in Palestine. And then you look at this all around the world, and this is happening in all these different places, and you do feel quite demoralized that this is a common human experience, and people are under oppression in different places and in different ways. And sometimes it can be quite demoralizing, and you can feel, oh, can we ever bring about change? Can we ever sort of make a difference and bring about the change? But I do think you can start to see the similarities between people, and the similarities in the way that people resist and are strong and can sort of fight back against these injustices. And you see that as well as the injustices, and you can start to sort of see human strength coming through, and even people who are living in these very, very harsh situations and under terrible occupation and oppression in Palestine. And you see there are so many images of resistance and of hope, and of people who still want to fight for their rights and to try to end the injustices. And I do think there is that bit of hope in there as well. Yeah,
I think that's the thing that's so fascinating about it, is that you're doing that kind of immersive deep dive into the research, and you found all of this, in many cases, human misery and suffering and kind of oppression and stuff like that. And it gives you an opportunity, a starting point to think about, well, where does that come from? Who's not so much who's to blame as, you know, where did the initial antagonism come from? Because it's so now entrenched, a bit like Northern Ireland to an extent. It's so entrenched that people either have an opinion based on their parents, history, education system, without actually dealing with the reality of the fact that here and now there are two people in direct opposition to each other that are in conflict based on lots of other stuff other than the fact that they've never had a conversation with each other. And as a Cockney, I always bring things down to the lowest common denominator, which is a cup of tea. You know what I mean? Which is, until you're talking to someone, you're never going to learn about them, their story, their background, why they're like that, you know, all these kind of things. That I think what I'm fascinated to see your research at the end and continue talking to you here at the Doc Media Centre is the fact that it's about a starting point to have a conversation about, is there any solidarity in there? Because unless there's solidarity amongst people and looking around the world, is anybody ever really going to understand the situation beyond the mainstream driven narrative, or, you know, Hollywood's version of this or Netflix's version of that? We're constantly pushing back against it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really the power comes when people are able to join up and make those connections between different movements around the world, like we're seeing with the Black Lives Matter and Palestinians. They are sharing information, they're sharing sort of tactics, and that solidarity, even if it's just solidarity and saying, okay, well, I see you, we're experiencing the same sort of thing, we're going to get through this. And I do think that does come through on social media. We're able to create these sort of networks of people who are working for these different causes, but sort of the same overall goal and the same aim to try and make the world a fairer place and make it better. And I think that is quite powerful to see on social media. Definitely.
I love what you just said there, which is ICU, which is a kind of
Yeah.
surveillance, sousveillance, and researchers thing, isn't it? Which is just acknowledging people exist. ICU, it's got so many different.
Yes.
Yeah, it's cool.
That's
cool.
that's a journal article title for you.
There's your next blog post.
You can acknowledge John's suggestion. No, I don't know that's common, but I just have more confidence than a question. I suppose you'll forgive me.
No, go for it.
I think it's just interesting that what you seem to be sort of finding in the research, and this is certainly chime with some of my research as well, that sometimes visibility and saying something is wrong is a powerful act in and of itself, and that maybe we have unrealistic expectations. We often hear social media revolution, the sort of transformative
Terminology.
yeah, there's sort of a lot of rhetoric and hype, but actually perhaps what you're finding is actually archiving what can be quite painful experiences. They're not being reflected anywhere else. Is in and of itself incredibly important because that is history. And it's a history which will be there decades later when people do still maybe argue about the rights and wrongs of conflict. And I kind of wonder maybe that's something that your research can certainly explore to this in a really important way.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's such a key thing, really, just having that visibility and having these images out there for the world to see. And even if it doesn't bring about the change and within our lifetime, maybe it will be there as a sort of future reference and people to be able to see these were the experiences of people at this time. And I think that is such a powerful thing.
Brilliant. Well, listen, Jenny, thanks very much for taking the time for joining us this afternoon. We're going to be putting your blog post up as well, so people will be able to find that on the link and some resources from all of us as well. And look forward to speaking to you again. Maybe in the new year we can touch base again and just see how you're getting on and what the opportunities are.
Absolutely,
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good.
Great.